There exists a peculiar phenomenon in the architecture of desire that most people never notice until it's too late. A man can be surrounded by 1,000 voices clamoring for his attention, flooded with messages and declarations and demands, yet the one sound that will haunt him, the one absence that will consume his thoughts in the small hours of the morning, is the voice that suddenly goes silent. Not the voice that was never there, but the one that was, and then chose to withdraw. This is not accident. This is not coincidence. This is the operation of a fundamental law of human psychology that the powerful have understood for centuries. A law that operates beneath the surface of every interaction, every relationship, every dynamic of attraction. What I'm about to reveal to you is how silence, wielded with precision and awareness, becomes the most potent instrument of influence you possess. Not because it manipulates, but because it forces truth to surface. Before we proceed further, let me be clear about the nature of what you're learning here. This knowledge exists to protect you, to give you clarity, to help you recognize your own value and stop giving it away to those who don't reciprocate. Strategic silence is not about playing games with someone's emotions for sport. It's about stopping the pattern where you exhaust yourself pursuing, explaining, convincing, and draining your energy for someone who hasn't earned that level of access to you. What follows is about self-mastery and boundaries, about understanding the mechanics of attention and desire so that you can navigate them consciously rather than being swept along by them unconsciously. If your intention is to harm or deceive, this teaching is not for you. But if you're ready to step into a clearer understanding of your own power, then continue. I want you to do something right now that will anchor this understanding. In the comments below, write these words or something similar that resonates with your own voice. My silence holds more power than my explanations. Let that statement sit with you. Feel what it means to claim that truth. Because what we're exploring today is not just a technique, it's a fundamental shift in how you perceive yourself in relation to others. Picture this moment. You've been texting back and forth with someone. The conversation has momentum, there's energy, maybe even intensity. He says something that would normally prompt you to respond immediately, to reassure, to engage, to keep the connection flowing. But this time, you read it and you simply close the phone. No response. Not out of spite, not out of anger, but out of choice. You go about your day. You have dinner with friends. You read a book. You sleep well. Meanwhile, something extraordinary is happening in his mind. The absence of your response creates a vacuum. And into that vacuum rushes every question he's been avoiding. Does she care? Did I say something wrong? Is she losing interest? Why isn't she responding like she usually does? What changed? The silence you've created becomes a mirror, forcing him to examine his own investment, his own intentions, his own fears. This is the first principle, and it operates with mechanical precision. When you remove the guarantee of your attention, you force the other person to confront how much they actually value it. The psychology here is ancient and irrefutable. Human beings assign value based on scarcity and unpredictability. When your responses are immediate, constant, and guaranteed, they become background noise. Expected, taken for granted. There's no tension, no curiosity, no urgency. But the moment you introduce space, the moment your attention becomes something that cannot be assumed, the entire dynamic shifts. His mind begins to work in ways it wasn't working before. Suddenly, you're not just another person responding to his messages. You're someone with your own life, your own priorities, your own mysterious interior world that he doesn't have complete access to. And that mystery is magnetic in a way that constant availability never can be. A practical example, he texts you late at night, something casual, maybe even slightly presumptuous, assuming you'll engage. Instead of responding immediately or explaining why you can't talk right now, you simply don't respond until the next afternoon. And when you do, your message is warm but brief, with no reference to the delay. You don't apologize, you don't explain, you simply respond when it suits you. The action you can take immediately is this. Identify one person in your life where your attention has become too available, too predictable, and create space. Not to punish them, but to reclaim your own time and energy. The boundary here is crucial. This is never about ignoring genuine emergencies or being cold to someone who treats you well. This is about stopping the pattern where you're always the one initiating, always the one maintaining, always the one chasing. Consider what happens in the theater of social perception. When you're always the one reaching out, always the one maintaining contact, always the one filling silences, you inadvertently communicate something about the balance of value in the relationship. You're saying, through your actions, that their time is more precious than yours, that their attention is the prize while yours is freely given. But watch what happens when you invert this. When you become comfortable in silence, when you're not rushing to fill every gap in communication, when you allow hours or even days to pass without contact, you create a completely different impression. You become someone who clearly has a full life, someone whose attention is a privilege rather than a given. And this isn't about pretending or performing. This is about actually building a life so rich and engaging that you genuinely don't need to be in constant contact with anyone. The most authentic form of strategic silence is the silence of someone who is genuinely occupied with things that matter to them. There's a conversation happening right now, somewhere, where a woman is explaining herself, explaining why she feels a certain way, explaining why his behavior hurt her, explaining what she needs, explaining and explaining and explaining. And with every word, she loses ground. Not because her points aren't valid, not because her feelings aren't real, but because in the economy of attraction, explanation reads as justification, and justification reads as weakness. Now picture the alternative. She says what she needs to say in one clear, calm sentence. Then she stops. She doesn't elaborate. She doesn't defend. She doesn't fill the uncomfortable silence that follows. She simply lets her words land and waits. The discomfort he feels in that silence is not cruelty on her part. It's the weight of responsibility landing where it belongs. This is the second truth about silence. It places accountability exactly where it should be, without you having to exhaust yourself arguing for your own worth. When you over-explain, you invite negotiation. You signal that your boundary is actually a starting point for discussion rather than a firm line. But when you state something once and then go silent, you communicate finality. You communicate that you've said what needed to be said, and now it's his turn to decide how he'll respond to that reality. Will he step up? Will he deflect? Will he ignore it? His response will tell you everything you need to know, but only if you give him the space to reveal himself through his actions, rather than letting him smooth things over with words while nothing changes. Let me give you a concrete scenario. He cancels plans at the last minute. Again. In the past, you might have sent a long message about how this makes you feel, about patterns, about respect, trying to make him understand. This time, you send one sentence. I'm not available for plans that don't hold firm. Then nothing. No follow-up, no checking if he got the message, no softening it with, but I understand if you're busy. Just that one sentence, and then you go silent. In that silence, he's forced to sit with the consequence of his action without you managing his feelings about it. The immediate action. The next time someone crosses a boundary, state the boundary once, clearly, and calmly. Then go completely silent. Don't monitor their reaction. Don't wait for their response. State it and move on with your day. The ethical line. This is about protecting your own standards, not about punishing someone or playing mind games. If someone repeatedly shows you they don't respect your boundaries after you've clearly stated them, silence eventually becomes permanent distance, and that's healthy. Now we arrive at something more subtle, more nuanced. There are moments in any developing connection where someone will test you, not necessarily consciously, but they're testing to see how you'll react, testing to see how much they can get away with, testing to see if you'll maintain your standards or if they'll crumble under the pressure of wanting to be liked. These tests come in many forms: the slightly disrespectful comment wrapped in humor, the sudden coolness after you've been warm, the inconsistent effort, the way he pulls back the moment you move closer. Most people fail these tests by immediately trying to fix things, by chasing, by lowering their standards, by accommodating the bad behavior to restore the connection. But here's what the strategically aware person understands. The correct response to a test is often no response at all. When someone pulls back and you mirror that by living your life without chasing, you pass. When someone makes a comment designed to make you feel uncertain and you simply smile and say nothing, continuing as if it didn't land, you pass. When someone creates distance to see if you'll panic and pursue, and instead you become genuinely busy with your own life, you pass. The mechanism behind this is profound. When you don't react to tests, when you remain centered and unbothered, you communicate something powerful about your level of security and your perception of your own value. You're saying, without words, that you don't need to convince anyone of your worth, you don't need to chase anyone to validate yourself, and you're perfectly fine whether this works out or not. That self-possession is deeply attractive because it's rare. Most people are so hungry for validation, so afraid of loss, that they'll compromise themselves at the first sign of someone's interest waning. But when you don't, when you can hold silence and space without anxiety, you immediately differentiate yourself from everyone else he's encountered. Here's a specific example from professional life that illustrates this perfectly. You pitch an idea in a meeting. Someone dismisses it with a cutting remark. Every instinct wants you to defend, to explain, to convince. Instead, you simply nod slightly, as if considering their point, and say nothing. You don't argue. You don't justify. The silence that follows is uncomfortable, but you let it sit. Often, someone else in the room will speak up in that silence. Or the person who dismissed you will, in the discomfort, start backtracking or softening. Or the idea will come back around later with more support because you didn't make it desperate by over-defending it. The action. Next time someone tests you with behavior designed to make you react, respond with calm and silence. Don't take the bait. Don't rush to fix things. Let them sit with their own behavior. The boundary. This doesn't mean accepting genuine disrespect. If someone is truly mistreating you, silence is the precursor to distance. But for the normal tests that happen in early connections, strategic non-reaction is often more powerful than any words could be. Let's examine the architecture of emotional revelation. There's an instinct, particularly when you feel a strong connection with someone, to share everything, to open up completely, to let them see all of you, to create intimacy through disclosure. And while vulnerability has its place, timing is everything. When you reveal too much too soon, when you lay all your cards on the table before the other person has invested anything, you eliminate mystery and you create an imbalanced dynamic where they know everything about you while you know little about them. Strategic silence about your inner world, about your past, about your plans and dreams, creates an essential asymmetry of information that keeps someone curious and engaged. I'm not suggesting you be deceptive. I'm suggesting you understand that revelation is valuable and should be treated as such. Every time he asks you a question about yourself, you have a choice. You can answer fully, or you can answer partially and then turn it back to him, or you can answer with something intriguing that raises more questions than it answers. The woman who tells her entire life story on the first date has given away all her mystery. The woman who shares carefully, who keeps some things private, who references experiences without fully explaining them, who seems to have depths that haven't been plumbed, she's the one who occupies his thoughts afterward. There's a reason why throughout history, those who held power understood the value of being slightly unknowable. When people can't quite figure you out, when there's always more beneath the surface, they stay engaged. They keep trying to understand. They invest more energy in penetrating the mystery. A real-world example. He asks about your past relationships. Instead of detailing every heartbreak and explaining all your relationship history, you might say something like, "I've learned a lot about what I need and what I won't accept," and then smile and change the subject. That one sentence tells him you have experience, you have standards, and you're not going to lay out your entire romantic history for analysis. The intrigue of what you didn't say will work on him more than any detailed explanation would have. Immediate action. Identify 3 topics about yourself that you've been oversharing about, and practice responses that are honest but brief, that satisfy curiosity without eliminating mystery. The ethical consideration. There's a difference between maintaining healthy privacy and being manipulatively secretive. If someone is genuinely trying to know you and build real intimacy, you should reciprocate appropriately. But in early stages or with someone who hasn't earned deep access yet, protecting your mystery is wisdom, not dishonesty. Somewhere in the invisible realm between 2 people, there's a dynamic playing out about who cares more, who's more invested, who needs this connection more urgently. And while it might seem romantic to imagine that in a perfect relationship no one's keeping score, the reality is that in the early stages especially, the person who appears less attached often holds more influence. This isn't fair, it isn't always pleasant, but it's true. Strategic silence creates the impression, and often the reality, that you're less invested than you might actually be. When you can go hours, days, or even a week without contact and be genuinely fine, when you're not monitoring his social media constantly, when you're not anxiously waiting for his messages, you automatically become more attractive because you seem like someone with options, with a full life, with self-sufficiency. The paradox here is exquisite. The more you chase, the more you communicate that you don't believe you can attract him through your inherent value. So you're trying to compensate through effort and availability. But the more comfortable you are with space and silence, the more you communicate the opposite. You're implying through your behavior that you have other things going on, other people interested, other sources of fulfillment, and while you enjoy his company, you don't need it to feel complete. That assumption of abundance is magnetic. Even if it's not entirely true yet, the behavior of someone who has abundance creates the perception of value that then often becomes self-fulfilling. People want what other people want. People are drawn to those who seem in demand. If you want a practical way to implement this, try this. After a good conversation or date, resist the urge to immediately reach out again. Let him be the next one to initiate. See if he will. If he doesn't, you've learned something valuable about his level of interest. If he does, you've maintained the tension and balance. Similarly, when he reaches out after a period of silence, don't respond instantly even if you saw the message immediately. Let some time pass. Be unpredictable with your response times. Sometimes quick, sometimes delayed, never forming a pattern he can anticipate. When patterns are predictable, they lose power. The action step: for the next week, let him initiate more than you do. Match his energy rather than exceeding it. See what happens when you stop being the engine of the connection. The crucial boundary: if someone never initiates, if all the silence is one-sided with you always being the one to break it, that's not strategic silence, that's lack of interest on their part. And you need to read that signal and adjust accordingly. Perhaps you've noticed by now, if you've been paying attention to the deeper current beneath these principles, that everything I'm describing has a common foundation. That foundation is this: silence only works as a tool of influence when it comes from genuine self-possession rather than calculated performance. If you're going silent while simultaneously obsessing, checking your phone every few minutes, crafting perfect responses in your head, analyzing every possibility, you're not actually practicing strategic silence. You're practicing anxiety with a thin veneer of distance. True silence, the kind that drives someone crazy for you in a way that's healthy and sustainable, comes from genuinely having a life that fulfills you independently of their presence in it. It comes from really, truly being okay whether they respond or not, whether they step up or not, whether this works out or not. That's why the most powerful thing you can do isn't to manufacture silence as a tactic, but to build a life so compelling that silence happens naturally because you're genuinely occupied with things that matter. When you're deeply engaged in work you care about, when you have friendships that nourish you, when you have hobbies and passions that absorb you, when you have goals that excite you, silence toward any one person becomes effortless. You're not strategizing about when to respond because you're actually busy living. And that authentic engagement with your own life creates an energy that's unmistakable. People can sense the difference between someone who's withholding attention as a tactic and someone who genuinely has other priorities. The former feels manipulative and eventually transparent. The latter feels magnetic because it's real. So while I'm giving you the mechanics of how strategic silence operates, the deeper teaching is this: invest in yourself with the same energy you've been investing in trying to secure someone else's interest. If you wrote down the hours you've spent analyzing his messages, wondering what he's thinking, trying to figure out the perfect thing to say, and redirected even half that time into developing yourself, into your skills, your body, your mind, your career, your friendships, you would transform not just your attractiveness to him, but your entire life. Here's something they don't tell you about power dynamics, something Machiavelli understood implicitly. The person who cares less doesn't always win, but the person who demonstrates that they could walk away without being destroyed usually does. Silence is the behavioral manifestation of that ability to walk away. Every time you resist the urge to chase, every time you let space exist without panicking to fill it, every time you prioritize yourself over the connection, you're demonstrating that you have other sources of value and validation. You're showing that while you might enjoy this person's presence, you don't require it for your sense of self-worth. And that demonstration is more convincing than any words could ever be. Words are cheap. Anyone can say, "I have options," or "I'm not desperate." But behavior reveals truth. When your behavior shows comfort with silence and space, when you can genuinely take it or leave it, people believe the evidence of their observations over anything you might say. Let me bring this full circle with a final principle that ties everything together. The ultimate purpose of strategic silence isn't to win some game or to make someone obsessed with you for the sake of your ego. The purpose is clarity. When you stop filling every silence, stop explaining every feeling, stop chasing every moment of distance, stop being constantly available, you create space for the truth of the situation to reveal itself. You get to see who this person really is when they're not being managed by your effort. You get to see if they'll pursue when you're not pursuing them. You get to see if they value you enough to respect your boundaries. You get to see if they're capable of missing you and showing up differently as a result. All the noise and confusion that comes from overfunctioning in a relationship, from always being the one who cares more visibly, that noise obscures reality. Silence cuts through that noise and shows you what's actually there. Sometimes what silence reveals is beautiful. It reveals that he does care, that he will step up, that when you stop doing all the emotional labor, he's capable of reciprocating. In those cases, silence strengthens the connection by creating better balance. But sometimes what silence reveals is disappointing. It reveals that he was only engaged because you were making it easy, that he's not actually that interested, that he's not willing to put in effort, that this connection doesn't mean to him what you hoped it meant. And while that's painful, it's valuable. Better to know after a few weeks or months than after years of exhausting yourself trying to force something that wasn't organic. Silence is diagnostic. It tells you the truth. And once you have truth, you can make informed decisions about where to invest your precious time and energy. The 7-day challenge I'm offering you is this. For the next week, practice radical self-focus. Instead of checking his social media, spend that time reading something that expands your mind. Instead of crafting the perfect message, go, work out, or call a friend who makes you laugh. Instead of analyzing what he meant by something he said, redirect that mental energy into planning something exciting for your own life. Match his energy exactly instead of exceeding it. If he texts once a day, you text once a day. If he takes hours to respond, you take hours to respond. But more importantly, fill your life so fully during this week that you're not sitting around waiting for him to do anything. At the end of 7 days, assess honestly. Did the distance create more respect and interest from him? Did it reveal lack of interest that you needed to see? But most crucially, did you feel more centered, more powerful, more yourself? Because that's the real prize. Not whether some specific person responds the way you want, but whether you've reclaimed your own energy and attention for yourself. Everything I've shared with you today operates on a simple but profound truth. Your attention, your energy, your time, your presence, these are not infinite resources to be given freely to anyone who shows slight interest. They are valuable, they are limited, and they should be treated accordingly. When you protect them through strategic silence, through boundaries, through self-possession, you're not playing games. You're honoring yourself. You're insisting that people earn access to you rather than assuming they deserve it by default. And in doing so, you naturally filter for people who recognize your value and are willing to reciprocate it. The ones who don't, who fade away in the face of your silence, who can't be bothered to pursue or respect your boundaries, they've done you the favor of revealing themselves early. Let them go with grace and without regret. In the comments below, tell me this. What's one area where you've been over-functioning, over-explaining, or over-pursuing, and how will you create space this week? Be specific. The act of naming it and committing publicly, even anonymously, has power. It makes the intention real. And as you implement what you've learned here, as you watch the dynamics shift, as you feel yourself becoming more centered and clear. Remember that this is just the beginning of understanding how influence really works, how attraction really operates, how power really shifts between people. If you want more insights like this, more truth about the invisible mechanics of human interaction, subscribe now, because what comes next goes even deeper into territory most people never see.